Amid the scandals and beheadings of Tudor England, one woman's quiet grace captured a tyrant's heart forever. Welcome to the story of Jane Seymour, the only wife Henry VIII truly loved in the shadowed halls of 16th century England. Where kings wielded power like a double-edged sword, Henry VIII reigned with an iron fist and a restless heart. Born in 1509 to a noble family at Wolf Hall in Wiltshire, Jane Seymour grew up far from the glittering dangers of the royal court, the third child among 10 siblings in a household steeped in tradition and loyalty to the crown. Her father, Sir John Seymour, served as a knight and sheriff, his life intertwined with the monarchy through military campaigns and courtly duties, while her mother, Marjorie Wentworth, descended from ancient nobility, instilling in Jane the virtues of modesty, piety, and quiet strength that would later define her. As a young girl, Jane learned the arts of embroidery, music, and household management, skills befitting a lady of her station. But little did she know these humble beginnings would propel her into the whirlwind of Henry's affections. By her late teens, Jane entered the service of Queen Catherine of Aragon as a maid of honour, a position that exposed her to the opulent yet treacherous world of the Tudor court, where alliances shifted like sands and one wrong step could mean ruin. Catherine, Henry's first wife, was a devout Spanish princess whose failure to produce a male heir had already begun to sour the king's marriage, setting the stage for the dramatic upheavals to come. Jane observed quietly as Henry's eye wandered. His growing obsession with Anne Boleyn, a vivacious, dark-haired lady-in-waiting, ignited the flames of the English Reformation. Anne's sharp wit and bold charm contrasted sharply with Jane's serene demeanour. But in those early years, Jane remained in the background, her fair hair and gentle blue eyes unnoticed amid the court's intrigues. Yet, fate had other plans. As Henry's marriage to Catherine crumbled under the weight of his desire for an annulment, Jane witnessed the king's ruthless pursuit of change, pressuring the Pope and eventually breaking from Rome to declare himself head of the Church of England. This seismic shift not only dissolved monasteries and redistributed wealth, but also paved the way for Anne Boleyn to ascend as queen in 1533, with Jane transitioning to serve in her household. Life under Anne was a stark contrast to Catherine's pious court. Anne's French-influenced style brought lively dances, intellectual debates, and a touch of scandal, but her inability to bear a son, delivering only the future Queen Elizabeth in 1533, began to erode Henry's passion. Whispers of Anne's alleged infidelities and sharp tongue fueled the king's growing discontent, and by 1536 the court buzzed with tension as Henry sought an escape from yet another disappointing union. It was during this volatile period that Jane's path crossed more intimately with the king's. Her brother, Edward Seymour, rising in favour as a gentleman of the Privy Chamber, subtly positioned his sister in Henry's view. Jane's motto, "Bound to obey and serve," reflected her unassuming nature, a balm to Henry's wounded ego after Anne's fiery independence. One fateful day at Wolf Hall, during a royal progress, Henry visited the Seymour family estate, and there, amid the rolling countryside, he first truly noticed Jane's quiet beauty and demure charm. Their interactions were subtle at first, a shared glance, a courteous conversation, but Henry's gifts soon followed. A locket with his portrait, which Jane famously refused to accept without marriage, showcasing her virtue in a court rife with mistresses. As Anne's downfall accelerated, accused of adultery, incest, and treason in a trial widely seen as fabricated, Henry turned his affections fully to Jane. On May 19, 1536, Anne was beheaded at the Tower of London, her blood barely dry when Henry betrothed himself to Jane just 11 days later, marrying her in a private ceremony at Whitehall Palace on May 30th. This swift transition shocked many, but for Henry, Jane represented a fresh start, a woman who embodied the domestic ideal he craved after years of turmoil. Their honeymoon period was brief, yet blissful. Henry doted on Jane, calling her his true love in letters and bestowing upon her lands and titles. Unlike his previous queens, Jane avoided politics, focusing instead on reconciling Henry with his estranged daughter Mary and promoting a return to more conservative religious practices. Her influence was gentle, persuading Henry to show mercy where possible, though she wisely refrained from overstepping, learning from Anne's fate. By autumn 1536, Jane announced her pregnancy, filling Henry with unprecedented joy, the promise of a male heir that had eluded him for so long. As her belly swelled, the court held its breath, and Henry treated her with extraordinary care, indulging her cravings for quail and ensuring her comfort at Hampton Court Palace. The birth on October 12, 1537, was arduous, lasting 3 days and nights, but it delivered Edward, a healthy son whose arrival sparked nationwide celebrations, bonfires lighting the skies and church bells ringing for days. Henry wept with relief, proclaiming Edward his heir and lavishing praise on Jane as the fulfiller of his greatest dream. Tragically, joy turned to sorrow. Jane fell ill with puerperal fever shortly after, her body weakened by the prolonged labor. For 12 days, she lingered in agony, Henry by her side, refusing to leave until the end. On October 24, 1537, Jane Seymour died at the age of 28, leaving Henry devastated. He mourned her deeply, wearing black for months and ordering a state funeral befitting a queen. Buried at Windsor Castle, she became the only of his 6 wives to receive such honours from him, and years later, Henry chose to be interred beside her, a testament to the unique place she held in his heart. Though her reign was short, Jane's legacy endured through her son Edward VI, who ascended the throne in 1547, and in the annals of history as the wife who tamed the tyrant's soul with simplicity and love. Her story reminds us how, in an era of ambition and betrayal, quiet virtue could conquer even the mightiest king. In the wake of Jane Seymour's tragic death, the Tudor court stood still, its vibrant pulse dimmed by the loss of a queen who had brought peace to Henry VIII's stormy heart. Born around 1509 at Wolf Hall, Jane had risen from a modest noblewoman to the queen who delivered Henry's longed-for son, Edward, in 1537, only to succumb to puerperal fever days later. Her death left a void, not just in the king's life but across England, where her gentle influence had begun to soften the edges of a fractured realm. At 28, Jane was mourned as a symbol of hope, her brief reign a fleeting moment of harmony in a court defined by ambition and betrayal. Henry, shattered by grief, withdrew into mourning, donning black and refusing to entertain thoughts of another marriage for nearly 2 years, an unprecedented pause for a king notorious for his restless passions. The court, too, felt the weight of her absence. Jane's piety and quiet diplomacy had tempered the religious upheavals sparked by Henry's break with Rome, and her death left factions vying for influence over a grieving monarch. Her son, Edward, became the focal point of the kingdom's future, a fragile heir under the watchful eyes of Jane's ambitious brothers, Edward and Thomas Seymour, who sought to secure their family's legacy through the young prince. Edward Seymour, now Earl of Hertford, rose swiftly as a key advisor, leveraging his sister's memory to cement his power, while Thomas's charm and daring positioned him as a rival in the dangerous game of courtly politics. Meanwhile, Henry ordered Jane's tomb at Windsor Castle to be crafted with reverence, envisioning it as his own final resting place, a decision that spoke volumes about her enduring hold over him. The people of England, from nobles to commoners, shared tales of Jane's kindness, her intercessions for the poor, and her efforts to reconcile Henry with his daughter Mary, painting her as a near-saintly figure in a turbulent age. Her death also shifted the religious landscape. Without her moderating influence, the struggle between Catholic and Protestant factions intensified, foreshadowing the challenges Edward VI would face. Yet, Jane's legacy lived on in her son, whose birth had secured the Tudor line, and in the collective memory of a nation that saw her as the ideal queen, humble, devoted, and tragically short-lived. Her story, though brief, became a touchstone for those navigating the treacherous currents of Henry's reign, a reminder that even in a world of power and peril, one woman's quiet strength could leave an indelible mark. The shadow of Jane Seymour's death in 1537 hung over Henry VIII like a storm that refused to break, but life at the Tudor court waited for no one, not even a grieving king. Jane, born around 1509 at Wolf Hall, had been the quiet force who tamed Henry's heart, delivering his heir, Edward, before succumbing to fever just 12 days after childbirth. Her loss left Henry hollow, retreating into solitude, his once boisterous spirit cloaked in black mourning garments. Yet, the machinery of the monarchy churned on, and with it, the question of succession and power grew louder. Edward, now a toddler prince, was the living embodiment of Jane's legacy, but his frail health and young age made him a vulnerable pawn in a court teeming with ambition. Jane's brothers, Edward and Thomas Seymour, stepped boldly into this void, their sister's memory a golden key to influence. Edward Seymour, now a prominent figure as Earl of Hertford, took on the role of protector to the young prince, ensuring the Seymour name remained close to the crown. His calculated moves in the Privy Council strengthened his grip, aligning with reformist nobles who pushed for a Protestant-leaning England, a subtle nod to Jane's own conservative but unifying religious stance. Thomas, the younger and more reckless brother, charmed his way into Henry's favour, his roguish charisma a stark contrast to Edward's measured ambition, setting the stage for a sibling rivalry that would ripple through the years. Meanwhile, Henry's heart, though scarred, began to stir again by 1539, prodded by his advisers, chiefly Thomas Cromwell, who urged a new marriage to secure alliances and stabilise the realm. The search for a fourth wife led to Anne of Cleves, a German princess whose portrait promised more than her presence delivered. Henry, still measuring every woman against Jane's gentle perfection, found Anne's plain demeanour and lack of courtly polish unbearable, annulling the marriage within months in 1540. This brief union, though a political misstep, underscored Jane's unique place in Henry's affections. No other queen seemed to match her quiet allure. Beyond the court, Jane's memory lived on in the people's hearts. Ballads and stories circulated in taverns and villages, casting her as the virtuous queen who softened a tyrant's rage. Her efforts to restore harmony, like reuniting Henry with his daughter Mary, were recounted with reverence, and her tomb at Windsor, adorned with gold and marble, became a pilgrimage site for those who saw her as a near martyr. The religious tensions Jane had once tempered flared anew in her absence, with Catholic and Protestant nobles clashing over the future of England's soul. Edward Seymour's growing influence leaned toward reform, subtly shaping the upbringing of young Edward, who was tutored in Protestant ideals, a path Jane might have supported, but with her characteristic caution. Henry, meanwhile, wrestled with his own legacy, his health declining as he grew corpulent and plagued by leg ulcers, his temper more volatile without Jane's calming presence. The court buzzed with whispers of who might next claim the Queen's crown. As Henry's eye fell on the youthful Catherine Howard, a vivacious but doomed choice whose fate would soon mirror Anne Boleyn's. Through it all, Jane's image remained untarnished, her brief reign a beacon of what might have been, a queen who ruled not through ambition, but through love and duty. Her son, Edward, grew under the weight of her legacy, a prince destined to inherit a throne shaped by his mother's sacrifice and the Seymour family's relentless drive. The Tudor court in the late 1530s was a restless beast, its corridors echoing with the ghosts of past queens and the ambitions of those hungry for power. Jane Seymour's death in 1537 had left an indelible mark on Henry VIII, a king whose heart, though battered, still bore the imprint of the quiet woman from Wolf Hall who had given him his cherished son Edward. Born around 1509 to Sir John Seymour and Marjorie Wentworth, Jane had risen from the rolling Wiltshire countryside to become the only wife Henry claimed to truly love, her brief reign as queen ending tragically after delivering Prince Edward in October 1537. Her death from puerperal fever had plunged Henry into a grief so profound that he shunned marriage. For nearly 2 years, a rare pause for a man whose matrimonial history was as turbulent as England's shifting tides. Yet by 1540, the court was stirring again, and Jane's memory, while sacred to Henry, was becoming a tool for those who sought to shape the future. Her son, Edward, now a delicate boy of 3, was the linchpin of the Tudor dynasty, his very existence a testament to Jane's sacrifice. Raised in a carefully guarded nursery at Hampton Court, he was surrounded by attendants chosen by Jane's brother, Edward Seymour, now a formidable Earl of Hertford and a master of courtly strategy. Edward Seymour's influence grew like ivy, creeping into every corner of the King's Council, where he championed a cautious Protestant agenda, building on Jane's legacy of religious moderation. His sister's brief time as queen had softened Henry's harsh policies, particularly toward his daughter Mary, and Edward Seymour capitalized on this, ensuring the young prince's upbringing aligned with reformist ideals, while avoiding overt challenges to Henry's authority. His brother Thomas, meanwhile, was a different breed, charismatic, impulsive, and dangerously charming. Thomas Seymour's flirtations with power were less calculated, his eyes often wandering to the ladies of the court, including the young Princess Elizabeth, a risky game that hinted at his hunger for influence. The brothers' rivalry simmered beneath the surface, each leveraging Jane's name to bolster their status. Yet their ambitions threatened to fracture the unity she had fostered. Henry, now in his late 40s, was a shadow of his once vigorous self, his body ravaged by obesity and a festering leg wound that filled his chambers with the stench of decay. His brief marriage to Anne of Cleves in 1540 had been a disaster, annulled after 6 months when Henry, still haunted by Jane's gentle beauty, found Anne's plain features and foreign manners intolerable. The failure of this union, orchestrated by Thomas Cromwell, led to Cromwell's downfall and execution, a stark reminder of the court's lethal stakes. By 1541, Henry's attention turned to Catherine Howard, a vivacious teenager whose youth and flirtatiousness briefly rekindled his passion. But Catherine's reckless affairs soon led to her arrest for adultery, and in 1542 she met the same grim fate as Anne Boleyn, beheaded at the Tower of London. Through these upheavals, Jane's memory remained a touchstone for Henry, her portrait reportedly kept in his private chambers, a silent contrast to the chaos of his later marriages. Beyond the palace walls, Jane's legacy took root in the hearts of the English people. In villages and market towns, her story was woven into fireside tales, portraying her as a saintly figure who had tamed a tyrant with kindness. Her acts of charity, such as distributing alms to the poor and pleading for mercy for rebels during the 1536 Pilgrimage of Grace, were recounted with reverence, her humility standing in stark relief against the extravagance of Anne Boleyn or the scandal of Catherine Howard. At Windsor Castle, her tomb, adorned with intricate carvings and gilded effigies, became a site of quiet pilgrimage, where nobles and clergy paid homage to the Queen who had secured the Tudor line. Edward Seymour ensured that Jane's influence lingered in the upbringing of her son, now styled as Prince of Wales, whose tutors instilled in him a blend of humanist learning and Protestant zeal, reflecting the religious fault lines of the era. The court itself was a battleground of ideologies, with Catholic nobles clinging to old traditions and reformers pushing for further breaks from Rome. Jane's absence left a void in this struggle. Her knack for subtle diplomacy might have bridged the divide. But without her, tensions flared. Henry's health continued to decline, his mood swings growing erratic, and the question of who would guide the young Edward in the event of the king's death loomed large. Edward Seymour positioned himself as the natural choice, his loyalty to Jane's memory a shield against rivals like the Catholic-leaning Duke of Norfolk. Meanwhile, Thomas Seymour's reckless ambition led to whispers of scandal, his flirtations with power drawing suspicion from Henry's advisors. As 1543 dawned, Henry married his sixth and final wife, Catherine Parr, a scholarly widow whose intelligence and tact echoed Jane's quiet strength. Catherine Parr's influence would stabilize the court, but Jane's shadow loomed large, her son Edward the living proof of her enduring impact. The Seymour brothers, bound by their sister's legacy, navigated a treacherous path, their fortunes tied to the frail prince who carried the hopes of a dynasty. Jane's story, though rooted in her brief life, continued to shape England's future, her love for Henry and her gift of an heir anchoring the Tudor legacy in a time of uncertainty. The Tudor court in the mid-1540s was a fading echo of its former grandeur, its king ailing and its future hanging on the fragile shoulders of a young prince. Jane Seymour, born around 1509 at Wolf Hall, had been the quiet heart of Henry VIII's tumultuous reign. Her brief time as queen from 1536 to 1537, leaving a legacy that outlived her tragic death from puerperal fever after birthing Prince Edward. Her memory lingered like a soft melody in a discordant world, shaping the destiny of England through her son and the ambitions of her kin. By 1543, Henry, now a weary giant at 52, had married his sixth wife, Catherine Parr, a steady hand who nursed his decaying body and reconciled him with his daughters, Mary and Elizabeth. Yet, even as Catherine brought order, Jane's shadow loomed large. Henry still spoke of her as his true love, her portrait a constant in his private chambers, her tomb at Windsor his chosen resting place. The revelation of Jane's enduring hold over Henry was no mere sentiment. It was a testament to her unique ability to offer him peace in a life of chaos. Unlike Anne Boleyn's fiery ambition or Catherine Howard's reckless youth, Jane's gentle piety and unwavering duty had fulfilled Henry's deepest desire, a male heir. Edward, now 6 and frail, was the living proof of her triumph, his every breath a reminder of her sacrifice. Her brothers, Edward and Thomas Seymour, wielded her legacy like a sword, each carving their path in a court teetering on the edge of change. Edward Seymour, now Viscount Beauchamp and a dominant force in the Privy Council, orchestrated the young prince's education, ensuring Protestant tutors shaped Edward's mind, a subtle continuation of Jane's moderate influence. Thomas, ever the rogue, chased power through charm, his dangerous flirtations with Princess Elizabeth hinting at a reckless bid to marry into the royal line, a scandal that would later cost him dearly. The full truth of Jane's impact unravelled as Henry's health crumbled. By January 1547, his leg wound oozed, his weight immobilized him, and death loomed. On his deathbed at Whitehall Palace, Henry named Edward Seymour as Lord Protector for the 9-year-old Edward VI, a decision rooted in Jane's gift of an heir and Edward's loyalty to her memory. When Henry died on January 28, 1547, the crown passed to Edward VI, and Jane's son ascended the throne, fulfilling the destiny she had secured at the cost of her life. Edward Seymour, now Duke of Somerset, ruled as regent, steering England toward Protestantism, a path Jane might have tempered with her cautious faith. Thomas, jealous and restless, plotted against his brother. His 1549 arrest for treason, partly due to his illicit advances toward Elizabeth, ending in his execution, a stark contrast to Jane's unifying spirit. The court records of the time reveal Jane's lasting influence. Her intercessions for Mary, her charity to the poor, and her refusal to become Henry's mistress had set her apart. earning her a reverence unmatched by his other wives. Chroniclers like Edward Hall noted Henry's rare fidelity to Jane, with no recorded mistresses during her queenship, a stark departure from his roving eye. Her tomb at St. George's Chapel, Windsor, where Henry was laid beside her in 1547, was adorned with verses praising her as "Phoenix of her time," a symbol of renewal through Edward's birth. Beyond the court, Jane's story wove into England's fabric. Folk songs in Wiltshire villages hailed her as the fair rose who softened a tyrant, while her charitable acts, like funding almshouses, were documented in parish records. Her death had sparked a national mourning, with 1537 church accounts showing bells rung in her honour from London to York. As Edward VI's reign unfolded, Jane's legacy faced trials. His Protestant zeal, shaped by her brother, led to religious strife, and his early death in 1553, at age 15, ended the direct Seymour line. Yet Jane's influence persisted through Mary and Elizabeth, both restored to the succession, partly due to her efforts, with Elizabeth I's long reign owing a debt to the stability Jane's heir provided. The final revelation is stark. Jane Seymour, a woman of humble origins, not only won Henry's heart, but reshaped a dynasty. Her quiet strength, refusing the role of mistress, securing an heir, and softening a king's rage, made her the pivot on which Tudor history turned. Her son's brief rule, her brother's rise and fall, and her lasting veneration as England's ideal queen, underscore a truth. Jane's love was Henry's anchor, and her legacy, England's cornerstone. If this story of Jane's quiet triumph has captivated you, please like, comment, and subscribe to our channel. Your support means the world to us.